in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. This is Buck Joffrey, and for the next couple of weeks, we're going to do some Q&A, just trying to get to some of your questions out there. We have a bunch of questions. To facilitate that, I've got my producer here, Phil, who likes to go by Phil Ferragamo. Phil, welcome back. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you, Buck, for having me.
Good. Well, why don't you start with the first question? Let's just get rolling.
All right. The first question is from Colin. Lane Norton, who you have mentioned on your program, is adamant that weight loss is nothing more than calories in and calories out, and that everything else is noise. Do you agree with this?
Okay, so the answer is kind of. First of all, we're talking about Lane Norton, and if you follow him on Instagram, he's a great person to follow. Bio Lane, that's like bio, and then Lane, Layne. I highly encourage it. Lane he's a bodybuilder. He's a power lifter. He has got like world records in squats and all that kind of stuff. And he's got a PhD in nutrition. So he's a smart guy. He's somebody to really listen to. Listen, at the end of the day, I don't disagree with Lane. Here's the problem, though. Calories in, calories out is correct. However, I think it's a disservice, frankly, to people to simplify it this much, because there's so much going on even with those simple variables, namely calories in and calories out. For example, the type of food you eat plays a role in metabolism. Metabolism ultimately is calories in, calories out count, right? Particularly through something called a thermic effect of food. Okay, Phil, what that is it's the energy it takes for your body to actually digest, absorb, and metabolize the food you eat. So in other words, you can literally have some foods, like say, for example, like celery, that theoretically has a negative caloric impact. In other words, you're literally burning more calories eating celery than you are actually taking in calories. Does that make sense so far?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so there's this research that suggests that, a diet higher in protein, and again, I'm not advocating, but I'm telling you what the research is, that can lead to an increased calorie burning situation compared to diets higher in carbohydrates or fat. So, for example, protein has the highest TEF, this thermic effect, and it requires on average 20 to 30% of its energy content for digestion and processing. In other words, okay, so you're taking in 100 grams of protein, you're going to burn off 30 grams of that protein just because that's what it takes to break it down and digest it, right? Whereas if you have carbohydrates, it might only be 5%. Or in the case of fats, it could be 0 to 3%. So that alone is one issue. Now, also, I will say that although the research on this is hard to get, there's this whole issue of satiety, like eating what food makes you eat less, right? Like if you eat 200 calories of protein or you eat 200 calories of carbohydrates, I pretty much guarantee you're going to be less hungry after eating the protein or fat for that matter. So you're just likely to eat less if you're eating things that have more protein and fat in them, right? So in that regard, again, is that it's a little oversimplification in my view, calories in, calories out, right? If you're trying to give somebody advice. But that focus so far is just on the question of calories in. Are you following me so far? Let me know if I'm not making sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's talk about the calories outside, because we just talked about the calories in as different if you eat protein versus fat versus carbohydrates, whatever. On the calories outside, listen, there is a reason why guys like Lane and other bodybuilders, people who are trying to build muscle, eat so much protein. And it's that it helps build muscle, in conjunction with resistance training. And it also helps to preserve lean muscle mass and fight against sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass as we get older, which just happens. Okay, so the reality is that a huge amount of that calories out part of the equation is about how much muscle you have, how much lean muscle you have. So again, calories in, calories out, yes, but if you're eating certain kinds of food, namely those high in protein, muscle growth and maintenance is going to be a net effect of that. And over the long term, that's going to increase the number of calories out. You see what I mean? So now you can say calories in, calories out. Yeah, but certain types of food are over time probably going to increase the amount of calories that are going out because you're helping to create muscle, in which case it's going to burn more calories, right? So the other thing I'll just mention, and we talk about this fairly frequently, is the type of macronutrients you take in affects your blood glucose and the potential for the development of insulin resistance. And, some obviously foods with higher carbs are those types of things. And if you end up with insulin resistance, that is messing up your resistance it's messing up your metabolism, right? It's metabolic syndrome. You've got all these other issues going on. If you're, constantly ending up with these high glucose spikes, right? You're going to end up in the spectrum of diabetes and all the problems that go down that route. So is that a calories in, calories out? Is that against that? No, it's not, but it's ignoring all of these other things that come in downstream, right? The other thing is obviously inflammation. We've talked about lots of inflammation with high carbohydrate diets. So again, bottom line is I agree with Lane to the extent that in the short term, if like between now and next week, I'm trying to lose weight, it's a calories in, calories out thing. But in the long term, it is so much more than calories in and calories out that I think that saying it's just calories in, calories out is really not, in my opinion, the best thing to tell people.
Understood. Okay. Next question. This is from Peter. What do you think of the stem cells in Panama that a lot of people are doing?
Yeah. So if you follow like a number of, I think like on Joe Rogan and stuff like that, people keep talking about the stem cell program in Panama. And, basically, it's because it's not legal in the U.S., but people are going down there and they're getting these stem cell infusions over the course of a few days. To be honest, I've kind of looked into this myself. And the reason in part is because there's a guy in town who owns a NBA team and a basketball team. And the word is that he flies that team down there every year and that the players swear by it, which, I'm no NBA athlete, but I think they have like aches and pains and a lot of them seem to go away and all that kind of stuff. So it's very anecdotal, but basically here's the deal. What it sounds like is what they're doing down there is they're taking stem cells from cord blood, which is like discarded placentas, right? Like after children are born, they normally throw that stuff away and they're basically able to harvest that and then use those stem cells. And what they're doing is they're like, they're cleaning them up and then they infuse them into people. So the thing is that what I will say is that for the most part, this is something that's, it's a little bit fringe, right? So it makes me a little bit nervous because obviously you're having these exogenous, like, cells that are not your cells, living cells injected into you. The thing is that we know that from our previous podcast that when the effects that people seem to get from stem cells is not actually from the stem cells themselves. It appears that the cells themselves actually get rejected by the body, which is not a big surprise. It's not a big surprise, right? It's a foreign cell and your body recognizes it as foreign and, will have a response and clear those cells out. If you remember, actually, Hans Kierstead talked a little bit about that. But in Panama, again, I've seen the protocol and they mentioned some potential for allergic responses. And basically that's really what they're concerned about is that your body's going to have this response and reject these cells. But again, going back to the Hans Kierstead podcast that we did not long ago, it's pretty clear that it's not the stem cells that are having any effect. It's the proteins and the growth factors that those cells make. And Hans calls that goop. He calls it secretomes, right? Secretomes. And effectively, it's like the stuff that the cells make. So I think that when people are going down to Panama, that's the effect that they're getting. And I think, effectively, I've heard the guy interviewed, the Panama guy, and he said the same thing. But, they're actually injecting the cells in. So is it worth it? I don't know. I'd probably be willing to try it. But the thing is, it's like $30,000. You go down there for a few days, you get your treatment. It's become like kind of a thing with a lot of famous people. So they're just jacking up the price. I'm hoping that we get this safer, cheaper version of secretomes that Hans Kierstead talked about that in his work through Immunis in the next couple of years, and that it becomes, much more widely available for everybody. Do you have any questions on that?
Yeah. Why is it illegal in the States?
Well, it's just not been something that's really, approved to do, right? In the US, we have fairly high standards. You have to go through a lot of testing, and especially when it comes to stem cells and injecting, foreign exogenous cells into another human's body. That's just not something that's really been approved to do. Now, you can certainly do like, your own stem cells. That's not an issue, but you can't really do the exogenous stuff. And the question why, I don't really know from that, but I think the point is that it's not something that currently is an acceptable thing in the United States. Maybe it will be in the future, but I suspect that it'll probably more likely come in the form of these secretomes that Hans was talking about. So,
okay. Well, what would it take for you to go down to Panama to get that stem cell injection?
Well, listen, I would, first of all, I don't think I'm going to be paying $30,000 for that. They would do it for me for free. I would pay some money for sure. I would pay some money to do it, but I'm not sure about $30,000.
Because you have a kind of a back problem, right? Wouldn't that help to fix it?
Yeah, I do have a lot of back pain, and actually, that's one of the reasons I was thinking about it. And when Hans was talking about those secretomes, I wanted to secretly get myself some secretomes somehow. I tried to talk him into it, but he didn't. He was unable to sneak me any secretomes under the table. So
no. Maybe you were too subtle. Maybe you just need to straight out ask. And
I did. I did. I did. I asked him. I said, "Hey,
okay.
can I get some secretomes?" And he basically said he couldn't do it right now, but he might be able to make some sort of exception later on, but we'll see.
There you go. Where is he located anyways? Do you know?
Where was he? I don't even remember. I would fly wherever. He's not in Panama. He's in the US somewhere. So
yeah, you just showed up at his office and just be like, hey,
yeah.
Got your second thoughts on the secretome?
Jeez. I don't know. I was like, I love the idea, and so much of it makes sense, and everything he was talking about, by the way, with how these things work is exactly what they're talking about in Panama. So to me, it's just like a much cleaner way of doing what people are doing right now because they want to do it and everything, and they just can't get it done in the US. So.
And you know what? Hopefully this podcast doesn't out the NBA team doing something illegal.
I didn't say what NBA team that was. And then the other thing is the other thing is like I don't think that it technically counts as a performance enhancing drug. It's not like they're taking a bunch of testosterone, although it might be. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is like these guys are already in such good shape. I think that most of them are doing it because of all these athletes. They're going to all have like their aches and pains, and a lot of the indication for this is really pain, which is what exactly I'm looking for is less pain in my back in particular. But
yeah, it's really brutal because like I remember like Yao Ming, he had an ankle issue and like other teams just kept stepping on him to get him destroyed. It's real brutal out there.
Yeah, it's a tough world, man. All right, should we let you move to another question?
Yes, next question. Have you considered about statins at all? And If so, wouldn't it be better for more people to be on Zetia?
Zetia. Yeah. Uh,
Zetia.
yeah. So here's the thing. Statins. So we're talking about cholesterol medications right now. And I got to tell you, this is a
Okay.
weird thing in like the wellness, longevity, biohacker ecosystem, where there's all these people who think that high cholesterol is actually good for you, and that they're like, statins are bad for you, and that lowering cholesterol is bad for you, and that it's kind of crazy. And I think it's downright dangerous because some people are out there, pushing this. Now, let me start out by saying this, that we know this is factual. This is not a theory, that ApoB, or specifically when you go to the doctor, that they're going to look at primarily LDL cholesterol, but ApoB is a better way of doing it. But say if your LDL cholesterol or ApoB is really low, you're not going to get cardiovascular heart disease. Okay? You're just not. If your LDL, your cholesterol is really high, you still may not get cardiovascular disease. However, in order for you to get cardiovascular disease, you have to have high LDL and ApoB. You have to, right? So the point here is that if you can eliminate or significantly mitigate your risk by keeping your cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol low, then why wouldn't you do it, right? I mean, the science is pretty clear on this. Now, a lot of people are worried about some of these things, like, for example, with statins in particular. There's like this hysteria about statins. I don't know. Have you experienced a statin hysteria? You may not be as involved in this stuff, but there's some people who talk about how evil statins are. The way statins work is they inhibit the production of cholesterol in our bodies. Most of the cholesterol that we have in our bodies is not taken in through food. Most of it is created by our own bodies. Okay. And that's why LDL, ApoB is largely a genetic problem. It's largely a genetic problem, not as much of a diet problem. There's some concern, some worries that, hey, your brain needs a lot of cholesterol. So if you are decreasing the amount of cholesterol available, are you putting yourself at higher risk for brain-related disorders, like Alzheimer's disease? That in particular, we know the answer to that. The fact is that there's plenty of data on there, and it's fairly robust, that statins decrease the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease by about 20%. And how do they do that? Well, it's probably the same mechanisms as cardiovascular disease. In other words, they're helping you maintain good blood flow to your brain because your blood vessels are not all, corroded and atherosclerotic. And so that's probably the reason, okay? But I don't want to take away from the fact that there are people who do really have symptoms that are not pleasant from statins, like muscle pain. And some people, like a friend of mine, had really bad brain fog, right? No doubt that was a symptom for him. Now, let's talk about Zetia. What the major difference between what I just mentioned with statins and this other type of drug, Zetia, is that while statins decrease the production of cholesterol by your own body, Zetia actually makes it blocks the absorption of cholesterol from your food and leaves the production of cholesterol from your body alone. But tell me, Phil Ferragamo, why Zetia might not be a particularly effective drug for many people. I won't test you further here, but as you might recall, I just mentioned that the vast majority of individuals' blood cholesterol is determined not by the food they eat, but they create their own cholesterol, right? If Zetia's purpose is to decrease the amount of cholesterol that you absorb from your food, and most people don't get most of their, their cholesterol is not significantly affected by their food, then it's probably not going to be terribly effective. Now, there is about 20 to 30% of the population that are called absorbers. And those are the people who actually do absorb quite a bit of cholesterol from their food. You can determine whether you are one of those people. There's a test. It's part of what's called a Boston Heart Diagnostic Test that you can determine.
Okay, so it's not just a BuzzFeed.
No,
quiz.
it's not like, it's not like, okay, close your eyes, count to 10. And it's not like something you can do at home or something like that, but it's called a Boston Heart Diagnostic Test. And that can help you determine whether you are one of those people who are as an absorber. Now, if you are an absorber, you're better off being on Zetia, no doubt about it, in my opinion. I mean, leave that endogenous production of cholesterol alone, And then finally, I will say that this question about cholesterol synthesis in the brain and blocking that not being good, I mean, it's not, theoretically, it is something that you would want to think about. So, if you can get your cholesterol down with Zetia by just blocking absorption and letting your brain produce all the cholesterol at once, it's probably the best thing to do for anybody, especially who has higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. We've talked about various genetic reasons that people might be more prone to Alzheimer's disease. And in those cases, maybe Zetia would be a better choice. Now, we've just talked about statins and we've talked about Zetia, but the reality is there's other options out there. And the one that I really, really like personally is called a PCSK9 inhibitor, just pretty new that Zetia has, which, it's like, it's only going to help you with absorption, right? What PCSK9 inhibitors do is they actually increase the number of receptors of LDL at the liver. So it helps the liver take LDL out of the circulation, which is kind of nice because basically you're not affecting production. So you can leave that brain, that cholesterol, the brain issue, that's not an issue anymore, right? Because you're allowing for production of endogenous cholesterol, but you're decreasing the overall amount of cholesterol just by, these receptors taking them down into the liver and getting rid of them. So that might be the best option. Here's what I'll say though, is like, one thing I do think is that if it comes down to either riding your LDL super high, your ApoB and LDL, versus taking statins, I'll take any sort of theoretical unproven risk of statins over high LDL anyway, any day, because that's going to help you to avoid cardiovascular disease and dementia. Okay, gotcha. So was that actually? Did you follow that or no?
Yeah, actually, that was quite a bit, but I think I did. Speaking of nature versus nurture, right? Because you said it's mostly DNA stuff. So in terms of longevity, how much of a percentage do you think is nature and also nurture?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody's actually proven this. I know, I've seen like David Sinclair say like only like 25 or 20% or something like that is genetic. I tend to disagree. I think that the genetic component and longevity is probably higher than that. I mean, and it's not just longevity genes, right? Like there are certain genes that are actually super centenarian genes that people have that literally are common in people who are living over 100, and they're very rare, right? But like, just take those out, and you just look at what we just talked about, which was cardiovascular disease. Some people are just born with genetics that give them high cholesterol, and it doesn't matter how much they work out. It really doesn't matter how much they work out. That's why you see like, these totally super hardcore workout people, all of a sudden they're running and, they drop dead of a heart attack or something like that. It's because There's only so much you can do to avoid, the genetic impact of having a problem like high lipids, high cholesterol. There's only so much you can do to be more prone to cancers. There's only so much. So I think the answer to your question, I think it's probably closer to 50-50. You can cheat the system now, right?
Okay.
In the sense that, again, I just talked about cholesterol. I mean, you're not sentenced to a life of high cholesterol and dying of cardiovascular disease unless you choose that route, because there's so many options pharmaceutically to reduce your cholesterol. So I guess you would call that nurture then in that situation. I don't know. But I think what I would say is like 50% of this, at least in my opinion, I wouldn't say 20%, but at least 50% is genetic. And I do think 50% is the things that you can do, your lifestyle, the things that you're doing. And I think that those things, those lifestyle things can make a difference of shoot, I bet you 10 to 20 years for some people. I mean, if you think about like, you've probably heard, Phil, of people dying of heart attacks in their 50s or 40s. You've probably heard of that.
Mm-hmm.
That shouldn't happen, right? It just shouldn't happen because I guarantee you those were genetic things that if in the vast majority of cases you could have avoided if you had an indication that there were problems. So I don't know.
Right. You see what I'm trying to get at, right? I'm trying to see how much of an impact are my bad habits.
Yeah. Well, bad habits are different, right? I think bad habits, I think the worst thing that you can do is lean into things that are going to make you more likely to die. Like, for example, smoking, as we know, is a major one. I mean, if you smoke, that's not really even a nurture thing. What I was talking about is, if you're living a relatively healthy life, right? It's still, I would say, 50-50 at genetics and nurture and lifestyle. But if you're not living a healthy life, you can certainly accelerate your death for sure. And, and when I think about the biggest things there is pretty much like smoking, uncontrolled high blood pressure, certainly metabolic syndrome, as we know, and that's just being overweight and stuff. So lack of exercise, those kinds of things. So.
Okay, kind of a follow-up question on that then. Bad habit, right? Because I like to sleep late, you know that. In the last few Ask the Doctor podcast, you talked about circadian rhythm and how your body kind of like adapts to it. So how is it that your body never adapts to you sleeping late every day?
Yeah, part of it is like because your body has a like an internal clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the brain, and basically what it does is it recognizes when there's daylight, right? So it's gonna be hard to fool your body unless you like never left the house, which I don't know, maybe you do sometimes. But unless you had like no exposure to the to your surroundings, and you were completely unaware of day and night times, it's your brain is going to know. So once your brain knows, it's going to wire up with the circadian rhythms through the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and so it's going to be very difficult to actually fool your brain into a different time zone.
Interesting. Well, okay. So, because you're in California, right? That's quite a good distance from the equator. So you get day and nights pretty equally throughout the year.
Yeah.
Whereas here in the UK, you get way longer days during the summer. So does that mean in the summer I can sleep late?
I don't think that by the way, I don't think there's a problem sleeping late. I think the issue, Phil, is really, we've talked about before, is like, your body's going to have a point where it thinks it's nighttime and it's time to sleep. Right. And
Okay.
that's, and we've talked about this before, it's during that first 3 or 4 hours where you are really going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of deep non-REM sleep. And that's the sleep really that you really need to hopefully prevent, to mitigate the risk of dementia in the future. Okay. The other aspect is that the, early morning time, or the morning in the mornings, that's when the REM's coming. So I don't think that inherently there's a problem with sleeping late. I think the issue is not getting to bed when it's nighttime and your brain thinks it's time to go to sleep. I think that's a bigger issue.
Gotcha. Okay. By the way, isn't it crazy that the brain named itself?
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you would expect. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess artificial intelligence has not done that as of yet. Do you use AI for much?
Yeah, for work. Just for work, really.
Yeah.
Maybe write poems sometimes.
You write poems with AI?
Yeah.
That's
with AI, yeah.
It's very soulful to do that. Have something without a soul writing the Perplexity is really cool. Actually, I like Perplexity better than I even like the whole AI, Chat GPT thing. Have you used that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes. I like to mix it up, see what kind of different results I get.
Perplexity is nice because it's kind of it doesn't seem to have the same boundaries. The chat GPT is like kind of annoying because like there's always a big brother component to Chat GPT. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Like,
I know what you mean.
Right. Like if you ask about a health thing or something like that, they'll be like, this is this and this and this. But make sure to get your doctor. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need the extra information. I understand what it is, but it doesn't feel like true artificial intelligence if you're like going off on some sort of regulatory framework and trying to make sure that, I don't sue Chat GPT or something like that. Anyway, and then there's questions they won't answer, I mean, not that I'm writing anything like, but yeah, try to ask it a question that's completely inappropriate. It'll get, it'll tell you to screw off pretty much. So yeah, we'll be back. I don't know, with some more content next week. Thanks for joining Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am in fact a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.